The code flashed red on every monitor. Thomas froze, mop in hand, as frantic executives crowded the terminal. 20 years of carefully constructed invisibility threatened to unravel in seconds, his daughter's safety or national security an impossible choice. "Any hacker here?" The question hung in the air like a knife. His fingers trembled with muscle memory from another life, one he'd buried alongside his real name. Thomas wiped down the last keyboard in the executive suite, his weathered hands moving methodically across the sleek surface as they had every night for the past 7 years. The midnight silence of the tech startup's Washington, D.C. office was broken only by the soft hum of computers and the occasional squeak of his cleaning cart as it rolled across the polished floor. He preferred the graveyard shift. Fewer people meant fewer questions. Fewer opportunities for someone to look too closely at the janitor with calloused hands that typed 120 words per minute when no one was watching. In another life, those hands had created encryption algorithms that protected the nation's most sensitive secrets. Now they scrubbed toilets and emptied trash bins, while his 15-year-old daughter Emma slept safely in their modest apartment across town. The soft ping of an elevator arriving on the executive floor broke his concentration. Thomas quickly pushed his cart into the supply closet, his heart rate accelerating slightly. Nobody was supposed to be here at this hour. Through the crack in the door, he watched as 3 figures strode urgently toward the conference room. Victoria Chen, the razor-sharp CEO whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by her intolerance for incompetence. Marcus Donovan, the chief security officer whose military bearing suggested his background long before his resume confirmed it. And a man Thomas didn't recognize, whose rumpled suit and harried expression suggested a problem that couldn't wait until morning. The janitor in him set to finish his rounds and leave them to their business. But the analyst he'd spent 15 years suppressing caught the word breach as the conference room door swung closed. Against his better judgment, Thomas wheeled his cart silently down the hall, stopping outside the partially open door where the voices grew increasingly agitated. "This isn't just any hack. They've compromised the entire Pentagon integration framework." Victoria's voice cut through the air with unusual tension. "Every system we've implemented for DoD is potentially exposed, and our entire IT department has been working for 48 hours straight without making progress on the encryption." The unfamiliar man's response came as a half-whisper, but Thomas caught enough. "NSA is sending someone tomorrow." But by then, the rest faded as Thomas's mind raced through possibilities, calculations forming unbidden in his consciousness like muscle memory from a sport he'd forcibly retired from. Marcus's fist hitting the table jolted Thomas back to his surroundings. "We're looking at a national security crisis and potentially the end of this company if we can't isolate and neutralize this attack by morning." The CSO growled, his military precision giving way to rare frustration. "The encryption is unlike anything our people have seen. It's evolving, adapting to our countermeasures in real time." Thomas felt his fingers twitch, recognizing the description of an algorithm he'd helped design nearly 16 years ago, before Emma was born, before he'd disappeared into the anonymous life of Thomas Walker, single father and night janitor with an unexplained ability to help his daughter with advanced math homework. He should walk away. Every instinct for self-preservation, the same instincts that had kept him and Emma safe through 8 different cities and a dozen identities, screamed at him to finish his shift, go home, and start packing. Someone had deployed modified NSA-grade cryptography against a Pentagon contractor, which meant old ghosts were stirring, and staying invisible was more crucial than ever. Yet, something held him in place, a responsibility he couldn't shed as easily as he'd shed his former name. If this was what he suspected, an offensive deployment of the quantum protocol, then the people frantically working downstairs wouldn't break it in time, and the consequences would extend far beyond this building to systems controlling infrastructure, communications, and defense networks across the country. Thomas glanced at his watch. 3:17 a.m. Emma would be asleep for hours yet. Safe in their apartment, with the triple locked door and the emergency protocols they rehearsed monthly but had never needed to use. He had perhaps 2 hours before his shift ended, before he would need to explain his absence from their normal breakfast routine. 2 hours that might make the difference between maintaining his carefully constructed anonymity and watching as systems he had once helped secure collapsed under an attack he was uniquely qualified to counter. With a deep breath that carried the weight of 15 years of hiding, Thomas pushed the cleaning cart aside, straightened his grey uniform, and stepped toward the conference room door, a janitor about to reveal himself as something much more dangerous. The conference room fell silent as Thomas entered. 3 pairs of eyes registering first confusion, then irritation at the interruption. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched upward in a question that didn't need voicing. Why was the night janitor interrupting an emergency meeting of the company's leadership? Thomas felt his heartbeat accelerate as 15 years of careful anonymity began crumbling around him. But the sound of distant keyboards clacking furiously in the open-plan office below, dozens of IT specialists fighting a battle they couldn't win, steeled his resolve. "I couldn't help overhearing," he began, his voice steadier than his conscience, the familiar cadence of his analyst days seeping through the janitor's affected working-class drawl. "You're dealing with a quantum protocol variant. Probably the beta implementation, and you're right. Your people won't crack it in time." Marcus rose to his full height, his military bearing transforming from merely impressive to openly intimidating as he stepped between Thomas and the CEO. "Sir, this is a classified company emergency, and you need to leave immediately." The courtesy in his tone was paper-thin, the underlying threat unmistakable, but Thomas had faced far more frightening men in his previous life. The stranger in the rumpled suit, however, was studying Thomas with increasing interest, his head tilted slightly as though trying to place a familiar face glimpsed across a crowded room. "How do you know what protocol we're discussing?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the unmistakable cadence of someone who had spent time in the intelligence community. Thomas hesitated, calculating rapidly. He could still walk away, claim he'd overheard some technical jargon and was just repeating it, return to his mop and his anonymity. But the attack timeline Victoria had mentioned left no margin for his personal safety. "Because I helped write it," he replied simply, watching as recognition flared in the stranger's eyes. The quantum encryption protocol was developed as a defensive measure against Chinese state actors in 2009, but it had a critical vulnerability that was patched in version 3. If someone's deployed it offensively against Pentagon systems, they're either using the compromised version 2 or they've found a new vulnerability in the current implementation. Either way, I can help. The words felt foreign in his mouth after so many years of pretending to be nothing more than he appeared. A single father working night shifts to support his daughter. Victoria's analytical mind processed this revelation faster than her colleagues, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the janitor who suddenly spoke like a senior intelligence officer. "You worked for NSA Cryptography Division," she stated, rather than asked, her tone suggesting she was already several steps ahead in evaluating the implications. "And now you're cleaning our offices at night. That's quite a career change, Mr." She left the question hanging, offering Thomas the opportunity to provide a name, any name, which would inevitably be cross-referenced against NSA personnel records within minutes. The moment stretched between them, taut with implication. His help came with exposure, and exposure threatened everything he'd built to protect Emma. "Walker," he supplied, offering the name on his current driver's license, rather than the one that would appear in classified NSA records. "But my name isn't important right now. What matters is that you have approximately 4 hours before this breach cascades through interconnected Pentagon systems and reaches critical infrastructure networks. Your people are approaching this conventionally, trying to brute force the encryption, but Quantum was specifically designed to resist those methods. You need someone who understands the architecture from the inside." Thomas watched as Victoria and Marcus exchanged glances, silently calculating risk against necessity, while the stranger's expression had shifted from curiosity to something approaching awe, his fingers twitching as though reaching for a phone to make an urgent call. Victoria made her decision with characteristic swiftness, gesturing toward the door. "Show us," she commanded, leading the unlikely procession from the conference room toward the open-plan office, where dozens of bleary-eyed IT specialists hunched over screens displaying cascading code and flashing warning indicators. Heads turned as the CEO approached, followed by the CSO, the mysterious government representative, and most surprisingly, the night janitor, whose presence in this situation defied explanation. Thomas felt their questioning gazes as an almost physical pressure, each one a potential threat to the careful anonymity he'd maintained for 15 years. But there was no turning back now. The moment he'd opened the conference room door, he'd made his choice. Emma's safety against national security, his secrets against the greater good. The main display screen dominated the far wall, showing a visualization of the attack that confirmed Thomas's worst suspicions. This wasn't just any implementation of Quantum, but one that carried distinct signatures of his own coding style, twisted and repurposed by someone who understood its inner workings almost as intimately as he did. "I need a terminal," he said quietly, and the sea of technicians parted silently before Victoria's commanding nod, revealing a workstation directly connected to the affected systems. As Thomas sat down, his janitor's uniform incongruous against the high-tech surroundings, he allowed his fingers to hover momentarily over the keyboard, a pianist returning to the instrument after a decade-long absence, muscle memory intact, but hesitant to release the music contained within. Then, with a deep breath that felt like stepping off a cliff, he began to type, his fingers flying across the keys with the fluidity and precision that had once made him a legend in corridors where legends remained nameless. The room fell into a hushed silence, broken only by the rapid-fire clicking of Thomas's fingers across the keyboard, a virtuoso performance that transformed the night janitor into something entirely different before the wide eyes of Victoria's technical team. Code flowed across the screen at a pace that left even the most senior engineers blinking in confusion, unable to follow the complex syntax and unconventional approach that bypassed standard security protocols and dove directly into the heart of the compromised systems. Thomas worked with the focused intensity of someone who had done this countless times before, his consciousness fully merged with the digital architecture unfolding before him, seeing pathways and vulnerabilities invisible to those who hadn't helped build the foundation upon which modern cryptographic defenses were constructed. "He's accessing kernel-level functions without authorization," one of the senior engineers whispered to Marcus, whose hand had instinctively moved toward the sidearm he no longer carried in civilian life. "That shouldn't be possible without administrative credentials that even I don't have." Victoria silenced the concerned murmurs with a sharp gesture, her calculating gaze never leaving Thomas's hands as they continued their ballet across the keyboard. The mysterious government representative had retreated to a corner, speaking urgently into a secure phone, his expression oscillating between alarm and fascination as he reported the unexpected development to whoever sat at the receiving end of that encrypted connection. Thomas barely registered the commotion around him. His focus narrowed to the intricate puzzle of the breach itself, a puzzle with familiar contours that triggered long-dormant recognition. The attack signature carried elements he'd seen only once before, in a theoretical exercise conducted in the deepest levels of Fort Meade, a proof of concept never intended for deployment. Whoever had launched this attack wasn't merely using stolen NSA tools. They were someone who had sat in the same classified briefings, who had accessed the same restricted development environment, who understood not just the code, but the philosophy behind it, a colleague from another lifetime. His hands paused momentarily as the implication hit him. If his past had found this company, had it also found him? Was Emma already in danger while he sat here, exposed and identifiable? The moment of hesitation passed as professional instinct reasserted itself over parental panic. Thomas's fingers resumed their dance, now implementing countermeasures that existed nowhere in documented cybersecurity protocols, techniques developed in classified workshops and never published, approaches that combined mathematical intuition with programming expertise in ways that appeared almost magical to the watching specialists. Lines of defensive code materialized on the screen, elegant in their construction and devastating in their effect, systematically isolating and neutralizing the attack vectors one by one. "He's not just stopping the attack," one of the younger engineers whispered with undisguised awe. "He's reverse engineering it in real time, tracing it back to the source while simultaneously closing the vulnerability. I've never seen anything like this." Victoria moved closer, her natural authority drawing her into the center of this unexpected development, despite her limited technical understanding of what was unfolding on the screen. "How much longer?" she asked quietly, the question directed at Thomas, but audible to the surrounding team, none of whom would have dared estimate a timeline for resolving a crisis that had stumped their collective expertise for nearly 2 days. Thomas didn't look up from the screen, his response automatic and precise, as his consciousness remained primarily engaged with the digital battlefield before him. 8 minutes to contain the immediate threat, another 20 to implement safeguards against recurrence, and approximately 35 minutes to complete the trace to its origin point. The attack is sophisticated, but carries distinctive markers of an operation I'm familiar with. The stranger in the rumpled suit had finished his phone call and now stood directly behind Thomas, close enough that his whispered question reached only the janitor's ears. Raptor Division. The code name for a highly classified NSA unit struck Thomas like a physical blow, confirming his worst fears. This wasn't random chance or opportunistic hacking, but a deliberate operation with potential connections to his former life. He gave an almost imperceptible nod without interrupting his work, and the government representative retreated several steps, his face now ashen with the implications of what was unfolding. Whatever response he had received from his superiors had clearly elevated this incident from a serious cybersecurity breach to something with far more significant national security implications. Thomas completed the promised containment exactly 7 minutes and 46 seconds later, the flashing red warning indicators across the monitoring systems transitioning first to yellow, and then, one by one, returning to a reassuring green as compromised systems were secured and normal operations restored. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the exhausted technical team, their 48 hours of futile effort finally relieved by success, though few among them fully comprehended how the night janitor had accomplished what had defeated their combined expertise. Victoria's calculating expression hadn't changed, her mind already racing ahead to the commercial and security implications of what she had witnessed. While Marcus maintained his protective stance beside her, his military training evident in the way his eyes never stopped scanning for threats, including now the enigmatic janitor whose demonstrated capabilities represented both solution and mystery. Thomas felt their scrutiny like a physical weight as he continued implementing the promised safeguards. His mind divided now between the technical task at hand and the rapidly unraveling security of his carefully constructed life. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the office, he could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the Washington skyline, painting the monuments and government buildings in soft pink light. Soon, Emma would wake for school. Following their daily routine, she would pour herself cereal, check for his text confirming he'd finished his shift safely, and prepare for another day of being the brilliant daughter of an unremarkable janitor. Except today, no text would come. Today, the careful fiction he had maintained since she was a toddler was dissolving around him. And with it, the barriers he had erected between his daughter and the dangers of his former life. Emma Walker woke to the familiar ping of her phone's alarm, her hand reaching automatically to silence the electronic intrusion into her dreams. The bedroom of their modest apartment was bathed in the soft glow of morning sunlight, filtering through faded curtains. Curtains her father had insisted on replacing 3 times in 7 years, each time with identical models that blocked exactly the same percentage of light and visibility from the outside world. One of his many unexplained security measures that she had grown up accepting as normal, like the weekly changing of their apartment's electronic locks or the fact that they never ordered delivery food to their actual address. She stretched and reached for her phone, expecting to find her father's customary morning text, a simple home safe that marked the end of his night shift and the beginning of their brief overlap period before she left for school. The screen showed no notifications, an anomaly in their precisely structured lives that triggered an immediate surge of concern. Thomas had never, not once in Emma's memory, failed to send that message. Not during blizzards that had shut down the city, not during the stomach virus that had left him barely able to stand, not even during the week when she had been furious with him for refusing to allow her to attend a weekend science retreat because it would have required her to sleep away from home in an unsecured environment. She tried calling his cell phone. An older model he insisted was more secure because it lacked unnecessary features that could be exploited. The call went straight to voicemail, another red flag in their carefully regulated communication protocols. Pushing aside her rising panic, Emma followed the contingency protocol her father had drilled into her since childhood. For any deviation from established patterns, check the secure messaging app first, then wait precisely 30 minutes before initiating emergency procedures. The app showed no messages, which meant either Thomas couldn't access his phone or he was in a situation where secure communication was impossible. Both scenarios fit the definition of emergency as defined in their family protocols. But Emma forced herself to wait the full 30 minutes, using the time to dress and prepare as though this were a normal school day. Her movements automatic, while her mind raced through possibilities and contingency plans that no ordinary 15-year-old should have memorized. The 30 minutes passed with excruciating slowness, each second amplifying her concern and focusing her thoughts on the locked cabinet in her father's bedroom. The cabinet, she wasn't supposed to know, contained 3 passports with different names, several bundles of cash in different currencies, 2 prepaid phones, and a sealed envelope marked "Activate only in case of separation." Thomas had never explained what circumstances might necessitate these precautions, but he had raised her to observe patterns, to notice details, to question inconsistencies, skills that had made her exceptional in school, and increasingly suspicious about the mismatch between her father's intelligence and his occupation, between his encyclopedic knowledge of cryptography, advanced mathematics, and computer science, and his deliberate portrayal of himself as an unremarkable manual laborer. With the waiting period expired and still no contact from her father, Emma made her decision. She retrieved her father's spare keyring from its hiding place behind the loose baseboard in the hallway closet, selected the key she had privately labeled Secrets in her mental catalogue, and opened the locked cabinet for the first time without Thomas's supervision. The envelope marked for emergency activation felt heavier than its physical weight as she broke the seal, her hands steady despite the gravity of crossing this forbidden threshold. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper with an alphanumeric code, a prepaid debit card, and instructions written in her father's precise handwriting. Memorize the code, destroy this paper. Use the card only for immediate transportation needs. Proceed to contingency location Alpha and wait exactly 72 hours. Trust no one who cannot verify knowledge of your 8th birthday present. Emma stared at the cryptic instructions, her analytical mind automatically connecting disparate pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed until this moment. Contingency location Alpha. The cabin in West Virginia, where they had spent 2 weeks every summer since she was 7, ostensibly for fishing trips during which Thomas had actually spent hours teaching her wilderness survival, orienteering and emergency first aid. The reference to her 8th birthday present, the advanced encryption algorithm he had created specially for her, disguised as a treasure hunt game that had sparked her enduring passion for mathematics and computer science. These weren't the emergency preparations of a night janitor concerned about ordinary dangers. These were the calculated precautions of someone who anticipated very specific threats from very dangerous people. As she committed the code to memory and used her father's cigarette lighter to burn the paper instructions as directed, Emma's mind raced through the inconsistencies that had accumulated throughout her childhood. The languages Thomas spoke fluently, but claimed to have learned from TV shows, his insistence on relocating every few years despite the disruption to her education, his ability to help with her most advanced coursework, while maintaining the fiction that he had picked up a few things from cleaning university classrooms. The father she knew was an impossibility, a man of extraordinary intelligence and specific expertise living as though he were entirely ordinary, a man who had clearly been preparing for this day since before she could remember. The prepaid phone from the emergency kit buzzed unexpectedly in her hand, displaying a text message from an unlisted number. Protocol Nightingale activated. Remain in current location. Incoming secure call in 5 minutes. Emma's heart raced as she recognized the reference to yet another contingency her father had prepared for, Nightingale. The protocol for situations where standard evacuation procedures were compromised and alternate contact methods were necessary. She had thought it was just another of his endless security drills, hypothetical scenarios that would never materialize in their ordinary lives. Now, as she waited for the promised call, staring at the open cabinet with its evidence of a life built on secrets and preparation for dangers she couldn't name, Emma realized that nothing about her life had been ordinary. She simply hadn't known enough to recognize the elaborate construction of normality her father had engineered around her. When the phone finally rang, exactly 5 minutes later, Emma answered without speaking, following the protocol that demanded verification before conversation. The fireflies at midnight cast shadows on water, a female voice stated calmly, reciting the authentication phrase that matched the one Thomas had made Emma memorize years ago. The midnight water reflects stars unseen by day, Emma responded automatically. completing the verification sequence that confirmed both parties were authorized participants in this emergency protocol. Only then did she allow herself to ask the question burning through her thoughts. "Where is my father?" The woman's voice remained professionally detached, though Emma detected a note of genuine respect beneath the formal cadence. "Mr. Walker is currently at Cicada Technologies headquarters, assisting with a national security matter. I'm Victoria Chen, CEO. Your father has requested that I contact you directly to ensure your safety while he completes this work." Thomas sat before the fading glow of the monitors, the truth of what he had uncovered burning hotter than the circuit still humming around him. The attack that had triggered this entire chain of events had not been the work of an unknown adversary. It was a mirror held up to his own past. The methods, the encryption signatures, the precise vulnerabilities exploited all pointed to someone who had studied his old NSA work. The revelation was as intimate as it was damning. He had been drawn out deliberately. His anonymity, carefully protected for 15 years, had not been broken by chance, but by design. The storm he had escaped had never ended. It had simply waited for him to re-emerge. Victoria, ever the sharp observer, stood beside him as realization hardened on his face. Her instincts told her this was no ordinary breach. The operation had been too surgical, too informed. As she watched him process the data, she understood what few others in that room could, that the man she had taken for a janitor was, in fact, a former ghost of the intelligence world, someone whose knowledge could alter the balance between nations. "They wanted you to find this," she said, her tone measured but heavy with meaning. Thomas offered a small nod, eyes still fixed on the endless stream of code. "They wanted to remind me I was never really gone." The admission felt like a confession, one not meant for any government record, but for himself. A reckoning with the truth that even in exile, he had remained a piece on their board. The arrival of the FBI agents confirmed what his instincts had already whispered. Their presence wasn't investigative, it was procedural, controlled, an extension of a larger operation that neither Cicada Technologies nor its staff had been meant to comprehend. They moved with the careful discipline of people executing orders, not seeking justice. Marcus sensed the imbalance instantly and stepped forward, his soldier's posture radiating resistance to bureaucratic overreach. The exchange between him and the lead agent was a subtle but fierce duel of authority. Thomas, meanwhile, kept silent, his thoughts already spiraling elsewhere. To Emma. If they had found him, then they knew her. The idea clawed at his composure, each word of bureaucratic protocol echoing like a countdown. When the elevator doors opened and Catherine Ellington stepped out, the air in the room seemed to constrict. Time collapsed, 20 years of memories, loyalty, betrayal, all compacted into a single moment of recognition. To the others, she was a stranger of power. To Thomas, she was the architect of his past life. "Hello, Jacob," she said, the name slicing through his false identity like a scalpel. Every eye in the room turned to him, each person reassessing who or what he truly was. Catherine's presence was more than official, it was personal, almost spectral. She was the embodiment of everything he had tried to escape, yet the only person who had ever truly known what he had been capable of. Their exchange was restrained, but beneath the civility ran a current of history too deep for words. Catherine's tone held both authority and something more fragile. Remorse, perhaps, or recognition of the cost their world demanded. She spoke of the test, the breach, and the need for his return, but the subtext was clear. Whatever threat loomed now was greater than before. And yet, Thomas could not ignore the ghost of accusation between them, the unspoken truth that Emma's mother had died as collateral in that same invisible war. Her death had not been random, and Catherine's silence on the matter said more than denial ever could. Victoria, unwilling to be relegated to an observer, inserted herself with poise and force. She demanded accountability, not for herself, but for her company and her people. Her voice broke the ritualized dance of espionage, dragging their shadowed logic into daylight. Catherine responded with calculated candor, admitting that Cicada had been used as the stage for a government stress test. But when she said the test had been necessary, Victoria's gaze turned to Thomas, a silent acknowledgement that without him, they would all have failed. The irony was brutal. The man pretending to clean their floors had been the only real line of defense. As the conversation deepened, a reluctant respect formed between the three. Catherine represented the machinery of secrecy, Victoria the pragmatism of innovation, and Thomas the soul caught between both worlds. When Victoria proposed her solution, an official transition for Thomas from janitor to cybersecurity expert, it was more than a logistical compromise. It was a bridge between past and present, between a life built on lies and the possibility of truth. Catherine, for once, did not resist. The logic was too sound, the humanity too rare in their circles. Even the agents seemed to sense a shift, their rigid professionalism softening as hierarchy gave way to something almost like mutual understanding. Thomas's thoughts drifted again to Emma. The idea of telling her everything terrified him more than any operation ever had. For 15 years, he had built her world out of careful simplicity, each lie a brick in the wall meant to protect her. Now, that wall had cracked. He realized he could not return to the shadows without dragging her there too. Catherine's revelation that they had been quietly protecting both of them since his disappearance struck him harder than any threat could. His paranoia had never been unwarranted, but it had been incomplete. They had been watching, not to control, but to guard. Gratitude and fury warred inside him in equal measure. As dawn broke outside, the tension began to dissolve, replaced by a clarity Thomas hadn't felt in years. He saw the outlines of a future that didn't require hiding. The path was uncertain, filled with risks and half-truths yet to be untangled. But for the first time since Emma's mother's death, he saw a direction that led towards something more than survival. Catherine's acceptance of Victoria's proposal sealed it, an unspoken alliance between power, intelligence, and integrity. Thomas would return, but on his own terms, balancing duty with fatherhood, truth with discretion. That evening, when he finally called Emma, his voice was steady but heavy with everything he couldn't yet say. She answered with the same calm focus that reminded him of her mother. "Is it over?" she asked. He paused before replying. "No," he said softly. "It's just beginning, but this time you'll know what we're fighting for." Outside, the first light of morning stretched across the city, catching the reflection of the Cicada building's mirrored glass. For the first time in 15 years, Thomas, Jacob, felt both seen and free. Not from the world he once served, but from the need to keep pretending he didn't belong to it.